The AI decision really needs to be focused on what magic can we add to our organization that will allow us to do things we've never done before, at a speed we've never done before, and learn from those things to do the next thing even faster. To me, that's the challenge, is that I keep trying to describe for people. You're going to use this technology to put yourself in position to make an amazing decision that you're not even capable of realizing today. You don't even know what it is, but you will get to that moment. If I can get you to believe in that, that's powerful. Now move forward to that moment in time. What's the next decision you're going to be capable of making sitting on this infrastructure, surrounded by experts who get how to use this? They're never going to want my margins, he said. Why would any of them get into my business? I said, oh, they're not getting into your business. Your business is a feature of their product. Their product, in this case, is a retail relationship with customers that yields millions of dollars. Possibilities become probabilities with this approach. And instead of, remote chances that maybe we can have that future, we can influence, we can make that future more likely by following this kind of path. I'm a sincere believer in that. I wouldn't have spent nearly 30 years on this path if I didn't believe that. And no offense to CFOs, they're wonderful and necessary, but the CFO in the room in these conversations tends to say, so how many bodies can I save? What's the headcount reduction I can make?
James McQuivey, pleasure to have you here.
Glad to be here.
So, you're from Forrester. I think this can be a fantastic and very important conversation. Give me a little background as to yourself and also from Forrester's perspective.
Sure. So, I'm a research director at Forrester. Forrester is a company that tries to anticipate the technology changes that are going to change business and society, sometimes by changing society, so business has to adapt, sometimes by changing business, creating opportunities to change the way society works. My role there is really to be that person who's looking at the long-term changes that are going to occur. And right now, I'm focused on getting the people inside of the organization ready for tools like AI. We've had a lot of tools that we've been asking people to use for the last decades that I've been doing this work. How we're going to use mobile at work. I even remember when we first started connecting laptops at work to the internet. Who needs the internet? Who doesn't need the internet at work? It sounds like a silly question now. But ultimately, we need to understand if we're going to, in 1998, put laptops on someone's desk and connect them to the internet, what does that mean? In 2012, if we're going to equip everyone with mobile apps to do their work, will they use them? How will they use them? We saw this huge spike in people's expectations of what the mobile could do for them at work, because their mobile in their personal life was doing so many things that they needed done more efficiently than they could ever do anything at work. Now we're on the same kind of verge with AI. And we don't only study AI, of course, because there's technology of every sort in the organization, but this is a big one. We probably have 80 analysts who are working on some aspect of AI, both how to roll it out and which vendors to choose, but also from our perspective, how do we prepare the people in the organization to use that? My personal lens, I look at the individual human psychology situated in a social context. And the social context at work is your team, the organizational culture. It's also your industry. Different industries have different cultures that will encourage or discourage the successful adoption of AI tools. So you can see it's an incredibly multifaceted problem, which means it's a goldmine for someone like me who loves to study these things and give people hopefully actionable advice on how to do what they're going to do next and how to not do what they come to us saying they want to do, but they really shouldn't because their people won't do it or won't support it. That's the time that we're in right now. And it happens to be, from my perspective, completely new. And at the same time, something we've done as humans before. We brought electricity into mills, a century ago, and that changed everything. We added computers. We had microcomputers in the 60s, 70s. We've done this before, so I don't think we're totally facing this blind. And that's my hope, is that I can bring some of that perspective to people.
Well, I think that's a critical point there. I mean, it'd be good to unpack this and for the audience, present a few concepts of, you've just said there, it's not necessarily new. And I would completely agree. Whilst it also is new, we've got the label of AI. And I think a key fundamental factor, and with all the guests that we've had today, and knowing the specifics of what Forrester do, I think it's going to play a critical role to educate businesses, because ultimately the true adoption and change, yes, from a consumer standpoint, it becomes interesting. But from technology, that tends to be the test bed and experimentation. The real adoption and the real revenues in the world comes from enterprise, SMEs. Now, if we've got a situation where the new label of AI, led by a very public narrative for various reasons, which is very consumer driven, is 18 months to 2 years old, and we just break down the cycle of who's teaching what, who has access to actually understand, and how long would it take effectively from fresh to train someone new to then get them into the industry, or to train potential staff. We're probably a year to 2, maybe 3 years away from actually having people generally to understand the complexity, the detail, to demystify things. So that leaves a very, very small number of people who are truly in the know, that understand the wider context, because it's really important to have understood, well, what really happened in the internet revolution, what really happened when there was expert systems, what really happened with SaaS technology, all the underlying factors such as security, the human interaction. Are you creating a great technology which figure out how to make it work, or has technology been created to enhance and enable problem solving, which critically matter within businesses? So it brings us to where we are today, and that education piece. So from your perspective, would you agree that we're in a kind of no man's land at the moment, where perhaps the right insights could give people a context that they can actually relate to and begin to think about AI in the new sense, in a rational, structured, relatable, older way, to address the same fundamental problems, to really be asking the right questions? Why? What are we trying to achieve? How do we create personal wins for people?
Yeah, it's a wonderful way to ask the question, because I'll just say, from my own history, I was finishing my PhD and teaching at Syracuse University in the United States, and my students, so Syracuse is known, the Newhouse School there is a communications school, very, very well-known, famous school. That's why I went there. The students were amazing, and they were looking at this new thing called the World Wide Web. This is the early 90s, and they were saying, there seem to be advertisements happening in the World Wide Web, and is that going to be a thing? And all the other faculty were in this place of saying, like, well, no. I mean, television is the world of advertising. Sure, you have billboard and you have some radio and a little bit of magazine still, but it's all about television. And the students kept saying, yeah, but that's not what we're seeing. But if you go to the textbooks and you read the textbooks in mass communications, they're all about the rise of these media and it leads to television. And my students were saying, that's not what we're experiencing. And so I said, well, let's have a class on interactive advertising. I had to go to the department. I had to get it approved. The senior faculty member who'd written a book on the power of television advertising said, oh, this is going to be a fad. Internet advertising will be a fad. I knew he was wrong. The students knew he was wrong. So we had to basically get permission to get together and make up a class. As internet advertising was evolving, we had to study it as it happened. The good news was the energy that brought to study something as it's happening. That's I'd say once in a lifetime, but here we are again. It's a time and an opportunity that you don't want to miss. You don't want to wait for the thing to settle before you finally say, okay, what was mobile? What was this or that? You want to shape it by the way you study it as it's happening. So for me, the fact that we don't have a curriculum we can point to about what AI really is and where it's going to go, because it's still happening, To me, that makes it all the more interesting to study, and the energy that we can bring to the people to say, okay, things we've learned from the past about how to embrace new innovations that change work dramatically, and mobile is probably the easiest one for us to point to. We studied mobile like crazy. We surveyed hundreds of thousands of people over a decade about mobile. And so I can keep saying, there was a time before mobile. Do you remember that time? Do you remember how when mobile first hit and Steve Jobs stood up there in 2007 and said, there's this thing called the iPhone? Do you remember how you responded? Now go back to that moment in your head and say to yourself right now, how am I responding to AI? And am I using AI the way that I failed to use the iPhone when it first came out, failed to take advantage of mobile when it first came out? Or am I someone who said, I don't really know what this is, I'm going to dive in and make it happen, experience it first, and then try to draw the lessons? To me, that's one of the things that we have to do right now. Experience it first, and then try to draw the lessons. So we have organizations coming to us and saying, educate us on how to do this. And we say, well, we can tell you what we've learned by sitting side by side with 100 clients over the last 2 years, not even 2 years, some of them only in the last 6 months, what we've learned about what does or doesn't work, about elevating their artificial intelligence capabilities, or what we call the artificial intelligence quotient, or AIQ, of your organization. And I can't give you a 10-year handbook that says here's how to do it over a 10-year period, because that doesn't exist. At the same time, everything you learned about what you failed to do in mobile, let's apply all of that. Let's learn from some of that experience that you did or didn't have, because it's going to be very applicable. Why? Because humans are still human. We have not evolved. We are the same. Well, we did evolve. We are continuing to evolve, but it's not in that short of a span. The same emotional capabilities, the same social needs. Like, if someone got an iPhone in the year 2009, that was different than when they got one in 2008. It was a different motivation, a different person, a different set of expectations. Someone who got theirs in 2010, or someone who was like me, stubborn and wanted an Android in 2010. Why? What is it about their psychology that made them do that? And then how did that propel their differential use of it? That's what's happening in AI right now in the workplace. You've got people in the workplace who are using AI because they just want to do something new. Some of them who are using AI because they know it's going to help their career. You have people using AI because they're afraid that AI is going to replace them if they don't. Those are all different motivations. They're all very human. These are the same motivations that have existed forever. So walking into your organization and saying, here's our training plan and here's our program, and now you're going to have to be AI experts in the next 6 months, simply won't work. You have to understand the human factors inside of the organization, measure, and then act on the differences across the people. Who is so excited that they've already been using AI, maybe off policy, or not according to the plan that the company has blessed. Okay, let's figure out what to do with that energy, versus the person who is in the majority of the population. When we survey in the UK, Germany, US, France, the majority of the population thinks that AI is a risk long-term to society. Whether it is or is not, and I know you've had many conversations here in the studio about that with people, the fact that people believe it is, those people work for you. How are you going to approach them and say, no, not our AI. We've done the due diligence. We know what we're doing. We have trusted advisors. We're using the best tools. Okay. Is that going to change their approach? Or are they going to say, well, now I'm ready to use AI. Thanks for reassuring me in that 45-minute presentation by the executives and that 10-minute long email that I had to read. That was my training and orientation on AI. Now, it has to be far more fundamental an approach than that in order to help people see how they can shape it, to do good in ways that will benefit them as individuals and that can help them be part of an organization whose goals they support. And that's where a lot of our clients, if I have to say it honestly, are making their mistakes right now. They're making the AI strategy about their goals as executives, not about the people's goals as an organization.
I mean, you raise a very interesting point there, which is moving into the human factor. Again, from our experience, there are a couple of key points. So an internationally well-known brand, which we'll announce soon, taking on effectively the adoption of our technology. The first part was helping understand with their legal department how to think about AI. because there was no context. We were the first company to engage with this international brand with any AI technology. And there were no rules. New policies had to be written. But that was on the basis that, well, what is AI? What are the concerns? The concerns with us are not specific. Our approach is trust and truth driven. So I think, again, the more that you understand how things work, and it's difficult because you're sitting down with a lawyer saying, right, let me explain how transformers work and why there are particular issues with LLMs when the context of what they understand is, I call it traditional software. It's still the majority of software and enterprise kind of SaaS-based, where there are the security considerations, there's the compliance, there's the GDPR, all the things which are necessary, potentially boring, but important. Looking at what problem are you trying to solve? What's the context individually, department-wise, the people on the ground? How does it benefit everyone and provide a capability for the organization outside of the individual interaction as well? And that's not even a concept that most people that I've discussed with in the enterprise world are even aware is a thing, because their interpretation, and a lot of the academics that I speak to, they get quite irritated. LLMs are not AI. Yes, they're a form of it based upon transformers, but there's a huge amount more. So that education component, again, I think what you guys are doing is extremely important for both a positive basis and to avoid risk, and provide the ability for people to, first off, before anything else, ask the right questions. From there, I think that's where there can be opportunity.
If I zoom out for a moment, one of the things that we see in the executives who are coming to us to say, I want to do AI, I know I have to, it's the thing. And I try to listen for the answer to a question that I don't ask up front, because if you ask it up front, they're not sure why I'm asking it. And but it is a simple question. Do you want this tool to do something that you already do, just in a new way? Or do you see that this tool can help you do something you don't yet do and maybe have never done and no one has ever done? Generally, everyone will say, if you put that question to them flatly, well, of course, I want to do the new thing, the bold new world, go where no one else has gone before, Captain Kirk kind of response. But in truth, most of their implementations and their plans and their ROI justifications hinge on doing something they already do, just a little bit faster or a little bit cheaper. And so if you walk in and you say, no, you need to understand AI differently, you have to understand that this is a thing that is going to scale and accelerate your ability to combine human expertise in a novel way. They're not usually prepared to understand why that would matter. Because they're saying, okay, so which of the current tasks that need to be done in my organization can I do faster or cheaper with what you're describing? So honestly, we end up spending a lot of time telling people, okay, here's some things, here's some tasks that we could help you. If you use this tool, if you use it this way and you train your people this way, you can affect these tasks. You can do them more effectively. The old thing in a new way. But heaven forbid they stop there. First of all, their gains will only be tiny over the long run. And most of those, and no offense to CFOs, they're wonderful and necessary, but the CFO in the room in these conversations tends to say, so how many bodies can I save? What's the headcount reduction I can make? And I keep saying in kind ways, it's like, if that's the only thing that you're using to determine that this was a success, you may not even realize the gain of doing an old thing in a new way. You aren't even paying attention to doing entirely new things. And understanding where the technology can take you and where you will be a critical factor in helping the technology take you there, because you're the one who's going to have to envision your potential once you've made these kinds of changes to your organization, to how you collect and share information. The example you were describing on security and risk, we see this all the time with talent and skills in the organization. Massive problem. You talked about doing risk assessments every 3 years. Workforce planning exercises are 2-3 year cycles, and they get baked in, and this is how many accountants we need, this is how many creatives we need, or whatever the industry of business is. And then someone has to ask for headcount against a model that was built 2 years ago. Well, what if you had AI to tell you in a continuous way, by listening to the activity in your organization, what skills you actually need right now, not the ones that 2 or 3 years ago you imagined you were going to need, and where they're resident right now. The exciting thing about skills ontologies that are AI-based, for example, is that they can see that there are skill sets emerging that you didn't even actually put on your formal list of skills people needed to have in the organization, but there they are. We can see them in the conversation that's happening on Slack or Teams between people on these particular teams. That skill is emerging, and we have external monitoring that's telling us that that skill is becoming more and more important, and it's a crucial differentiator in how your organization succeeds in this changing environment. That is scale only allowable with this kind of approach to intelligence. But then the humans still have to sit back and say, now that I see this emerging, thank you very much for giving me this new contextual awareness using intelligence in this way so that I now can make a better decision that's informed by the moment, not by the memory of what we thought 2 years ago.
And is measurable.
Absolutely. Continuously measurable.
I mean, I think there are 3 key points that I'm picking up from that, and I'm just trying to distill for the audience the really valuable points. One of which is the risk of adopting the popular narrative without really taking consideration as to why is it the popular narrative, and are you simply a customer of that narrative, or are you able to critically think for yourself? The other aspect effectively being, this is an incredible time of opportunity, and do people see it as an opportunity? Are they thinking about it in that way? Because if we can potentially do things, well, we know we can do things, and there are those that are adopting the ability for, as you've described, the things we completely agree with and describe and engaging with customers on, the ability to do things on a monumental scale with accuracy and in real time, and to demonstrably deliver better outcomes as a group, as an organization, as a department, and as an individual. That, if that opportunity is understood, that's what's going to move the needle. And are you one of those organizations? One of those managers, one of those executives? Leaders, yeah. Or are you blind and blinded by the narrative, which is really a consumer model? So the opportunity now is incredible.
When Clayton Christensen first wrote The Innovator's Dilemma, in which he described this disruptive innovation concept, it was new back then. I mean, he was studying this when he was finishing his PhD at Harvard in the late 80s, I believe. And he published in the early 90s. And it was the idea that disruption was something that could surprise you was a pretty new thing. He had to find case studies over decades of industries that were disrupted by a rising technology which slowly took over. He did hydraulic shovels compared to steam shovels. That was the case study in his original book. By the time you get to the late 90s, Intel is calling him and saying, this is going to happen to us. The early 2000s, Sony is calling him and saying, this is happening to us. And it's happening faster, and it's happening with more potent force than anyone had ever seen before. So in 1990, if you said, I've got a business, it's doing well, I don't really need to change it much, you were probably right for at least another half decade to decade. Since then, you have never been able to rest. The disruption that's happening is continuous, and the challenge that occurs when people see these disruption moments is they can either go into defense mode or they can go into attack. And I don't mean attack the thing, I mean attack the future. And defense mode is the normal response. It is the human response. We have, of all of the things in human psychology research that have proven to be maybe less reliable than we originally thought when their studies first came out, one thing has been reliably validated study after study for decades, and that's loss aversion. Humans have a tendency to overestimate future losses and underestimate future gains. And when you're trying to make a decision about, should I use this new technology? Should I marry this person? Should I take this risky move to go to California for 3 years, or whatever it is, your brain will naturally prefer to count the cost rather than to weigh the opportunity. Now, some of us are personality-wise a little bit odd. We flip that. We like overestimate the possible success and downplay. But most of us prefer to overestimate risk and cost. So when you have a new technology come along, it's very, very easy to see like, well, we can't do that. It's going to cost too much. It's not going to work in the first generation anyway. It's going to be a big problem. And that is what we have seen over and over and over, even as the rate at which innovations successfully disrupt industries. That rate has continued to climb. We've seen that over and over and over in our lifespan. And yet the people making the decisions continue to respond as if they're working with the brains they inherited, which we all did, as if it's 1980, 1950. Like, no, I just stay at the helm of my ship. I keep steering it the way I learned my whole career as a leader or an executive, and we're going to be just fine as you plow, right on into an ocean that's changed completely, full of icebergs, whatever metaphor you want to use. And so that, to me, we have been trying to help people understand, like, your natural wiring, as good as it is, it's helped us survive this many millennia, is going to work against you right now. You need to not see this new technology as an incremental change to your organization's operating model. You need to see it as a fundamental change in how you conceive of the information that's resident in your organization, how you conceive of your relationship to the expertise and efforts and talent and skills of your people, and how you operate as an executive, as a leader. I really think we're facing over the next 5 years a separating of leaders who actually have vision and leadership, and those who are just very capable administrators of programs that have proven in the past to be effective. And you always have needed those people, but the ratio of how many you need of which type has probably been 80-20 in the past, and now it's going to be the other way around. Because a lot of these programs are going to administer themselves more readily. They're not going to need as many people managing the gaps between policy and process in the organization as a lot of us leaders in organizations do. That's going to get massaged away by these tools, and we're going to be left with who has the capability to say, okay, I see the risks, we will measure them, we will deal with them, but the opportunities, those are amazing. And that's where I get a little disheartened every time someone says to me, well, we need to reduce headcount by 10% because, it's a difficult time in the industry. And I think, if you're going to reduce headcount, there's redundancies you're trying to deal with, that don't make that an AI decision. That needs to be a decision that you as an organization are wrestling with in whatever way you're going to do that. The AI decision really needs to be focused on what magic can we add to our organization that will allow us to do things we've never done before, at a speed we've never done before, and learn from those things to do the next thing even faster. To me, that's the challenges that I keep trying to describe for people. You're going to use this technology to put yourself in position to make an amazing decision that you're not even capable of realizing today. You don't even know what it is, but you will get to that moment. If I can get you to believe in that, that's powerful. Now move forward to that moment in time. What's the next decision you're going to be capable of making sitting on this infrastructure, surrounded by experts who get how to use this? There's really, I can't say there's no end. I can't be that superlative.
But it's evolving though. The world is fluid. I think in my mind, a couple of phrases. It ain't broke, so don't fix it. That's not really.
But it is broke.
It is. A Navy SEAL taught me about the OODA loop. Do you know the OODA loop?
No.
Or orient. Decide. Act.
Okay.
So, and it's constant. So you may breach a room, you take that, then of course you undertake an action, maybe you shoot, and then the situation has changed. So you have to reset,
do it again.
Do it again.
It's fabulous.
The consistent view of that, zooming out. Again, our perspective from a technology way of describing through technology and the fundamentals of the AI, the LGM, is the 3-axis time, zoom in and out of time, space, zoom in and out of space, and context. But as you said, as you zoom out, you then see, especially in time, for example, decadally. If you look at the climate and you look at what's actually happening, well, Northern Europe is increasing in temperature significantly more than other parts of the world. If you homogenize everything down to an average, and if you do that in sales figures, you do that in anything where you just come up with the average, you miss everything. But if you zoom out and also look at the trajectory, you begin to understand the future, and you begin to realize everything is moving. Everything is fluid. So Bruce Lee, think like water. And those that adopt that mentality suddenly afford themselves the opportunity to see what others don't see. The funny thing is, it's in front of all of us. We all have the ability to choose to zoom out, both in time and space, and see, actually, the evidence is there. Things are evolving, things are changing. So the second you pause time, then you've chosen to break things.
The power of zooming out is knowing that you can zoom back in, right? You must go in and out, and that will help you be in a position to understand when you do zoom out what you're really seeing. Because you were close to this before, and now that you're far away from it, you can appreciate it differently.
It's validation of context.
Absolutely. I like your use of the word context. I hadn't thought of it as so crucially intertwined with time and space this way, but you're absolutely right, because time and space themselves provide descriptive coordinates, not causal coordinates. Context is more causal. And if you want, in the end, you have to understand what's causing the things around you, but also in the future, you want to be the causor. You want to be the person who makes things happen.
The influence
Yes.
element.
And you can't do that if you're too close to things all the time, or if you stay zoomed out and stay at arm's remove from it as well. So there's a fluidity, you're saying, of how to think, but there's a fluidity of how to be that I'm starting to appreciate more fully, thanks to what you're saying, of just being ready to be in that future moment. Instead of, as I just said before, instead of in the memory of who we thought we were as an organization 2 years ago, when we made that security plan, when we made that talent plan, when we made that product plan. Product plans are notoriously based on flawed data to begin with, but they were based on something that we commanded resources and got budget approval on a yearly cycle from 2-3 years ago, sometimes longer. Now, it's understandable. You have to manufacture, you have to distribute, you have to have partnerships, we have to do marketing. All of that takes time. But there's a world in which it doesn't take as much time as it used to.
What you've just described there, and I know it well from music, it's the journey. It's constant iterative, right, we've done that. What's the feedback? Right, what worked? What didn't work? Iterating feedback. When you market, well, what's the response of the people? This marketing campaign was better than that one. Why are people responding? You're constantly seeking feedback to iteratively improve. And in every particular function of the business, as that happens more and more and more, and quicker, and can be contextually understood, it is effectively describing the journey and extrapolating the value from the journey. And this, what would used to be 20 years, is now 1 year of that value. So the scale and the quantity of the data, the validation, that human experience, that human expertise is the difference underlying capability-driven AI within an organization. But of course it's always in the perspective of the future tense, the goal. What does good look like? And you may refine the view of what good looks like, but we had it when we started the channel. We're going to get 1,000 subscribers, and we got to 1,000. We want 10,000. Then we got our first silver plaque for 100,000. So what good looked like was subject to change.
Now it should.
Yeah.
Now, and congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. Now we're at 300 and something. And we want the gold one. When we get there, we'll probably be saying, we want the next one. And it's progression within reason, of course, because to us it represents a successful outcome of the point and purpose of why we do this, to enable a platform for educated, interesting people to share a perspective which otherwise people may not have access to.
I think what you're describing is possible because you are in a fluid environment. I mean, visual media today is a completely different environment than the long lead production cycles of television back when I was studying television in the 90s still. But also your people who've chosen to be these kind of people who do set goals knowing that you're going to change them when they are either crossed or not met. And the biggest red flag I have, you're describing this wonderful world that I am so ready for. There are leaders who won't be able to get their organizations there. They are not able to think that way. And I'll just, a super easy example. So when I left academia almost 30 years ago, this one skill that I had as an academic that was very useful in business was survey work. And that's what I've been doing for Forrester for a long time. I've led the survey of over 1 million people in 20 countries over my career. And I love that because I love learning about these people. But I will tell you that the executives that commission custom studies rarely want to actually learn about people. I hate to say this out loud because there are several who do. There are several who come and say, please tell me what my people want, what my customer, my target, my employees, what is it that they need? What's lacking? How can I help? What are the things that I'm doing well that I can continue to do? They really want that. There are other executives who don't. They want a survey that goes out into the world and they'll spend a lot of money on it. We're talking millions sometimes, and come back and they want the answer that they already imagined in their head was the answer. Now that's when you're spending millions on survey with long lead times, 6 months to do a project, come back and do the big executive boardroom thing, show the results, and then have the executive say, yep, that says exactly what we told you we needed to say, thank you very much. And that's the most cynical version.
It's justification, isn't it?
That's what they want. Now imagine that same mindset going into an AI experience, where AI can completely surprise you, sometimes because it is wrong, which is important. You need to learn how to discern when it's wrong. But what if AI tells you something you as an executive don't want to hear, and you can't just apply your executive prerogative to tell people, well, that's not what I thought, or that's not what I wanted to hear, and I'm mimicking people who really say these things in executive settings. Well, that's not what our priority is, or whatever. It's like, it doesn't matter whether you want that or not. That is what is. And you can't blame the surveyor, you can't blame the tool, you can't say people don't know really what they want. The information that is being gathered by all of our systems, because we've done it right in the world you're describing, will tell you what needs to be done, what gaps need to be filled, what problems need to be fixed, what opportunities need to be seized. But if it's not what you as an executive wanted, and so you're inclined to reject it, you need to be out of that seat. Someone else needs to be in that seat.
There are many organizations where that attitude is afforded for a period of time. But equally, it should be a source of inspiration for others to say, there are many people sitting there who are not willing to think correctly. Therefore, it exacerbates the size of the opportunity.
For me.
Because effectively, you're the guy that's willing to train and run harder and faster than everyone else. And you see everyone else just sitting there saying, well, I'm the fastest person in the world, whilst they sit there, eat cakes and don't exercise. And you think, okay, maybe for today you sit on the throne, but you won't be there long. A friend of mine said, the function of a CEO in a major company, CEO specifically, especially a listed company, is to ensure the share price of the company goes up each quarter. Yeah. So therefore making long-term decisions which are to the benefit of the organization, which could increase revenue, increase the size, to be to the benefit of everyone, but might take 2 years, will lead to that individual position going, because the metric upon which you are measured is a single metric, share price every 3 months.
That's essentially stochastic. It's not a number that you can actually meaningfully direct. You can simply try to create the energy around it that will make people perceive it the way you want to perceive. And I feel Like we're on the verge of maybe using AI tools specifically in a way that help executives overcome that kind of bias. You need to have an executive who says, I know exactly how I'm being measured and it's wrong. Because here's the model that I've done, here's the data we have, here's the evidence we have, here's the testing we've done, here's the iterations we've gone through to show that actually this other path in the long run pays off for everybody, customers, shareholders, and employees. We're going to do that.
Well, you see the adoption of the right way of thinking, because that situation I just described, in reality, is the preserve of 0.0 recurring 1% companies. And it's similar to, I think, the Coca-Cola company. They spend X amount on advertising. If they spent more, they wouldn't get any more market share. If they spend less, it'll reduce. If they spend the same, it'll stay where it is. So that's just the propagation of the continuation of a position where there probably isn't much growth. The majority of all companies in the world are not in that position.
There.
There's also, for very, very large companies, a huge amount of risk where if they do not think correctly, there's a lot to lose. So on one side, there's massive opportunity, and because of the speed, because of the efficiency, people can come out of nowhere, become incredible disruptors. And I saw a little line chart which sort of went across sort of 4 decades, and it showed the market cap and the revenues of the biggest companies in the US. And you see them and they're all sort of competing. It was the old sort of names. Then you see the disruptors come in, and sort of Apple and Amazon and Meta, and you begin to look at just the rate at which they came out of nowhere. They didn't even exist. And now we talk about, is it FANG? Is it Facebook, Apple?
Netflix is on the list.
Yeah. That's an interesting one. But obviously now NVIDIA as well.
Oh,
I think yesterday.
That's probably the new N is NVIDIA.
Yeah. Because they hit, was it 4 trillion yesterday?
It's just astonishing. I remember when they were first teasing with the idea that one of these companies would have $1 trillion market share. I think Apple got there first, I think. But and now we're talking 3 and 4. It's remarkable. And the speed with which you can do that on that scale, when we talk about those examples, people will say, well, that's big tech companies. No, this happens in many, many industries where you realize that people in existing industries are asleep at the wheel, and you can come in and change them. I had a really remarkable interview a few years back with a gentleman in the US who has completely taken over the parking garage market in the United States. And he's done it by just being ruthlessly innovative and incredibly focused on his employee base, which is one of the reasons I interviewed him, is that he's very focused on who are these people who are willing to sit in a garage and take tickets all day long, and how do I make their lives meaningful for the 1 to 2 years that they're going to work for me, because he knows they're not going to work there forever. And he, just by paying attention to things that everyone else in that business just that, well, this is the nature of the business, nothing we can do. So he's not using any sophisticated technology yet. But once he got to a scale where he could be more efficient and have more access to capital, then he invested in dramatic parking technologies. The technology came later because he was already someone who knew how to create opportunities from other people's lack of attention. I feel like AI accelerates that in every possible industry. There's really nowhere that you can't say to yourself, I'm the person who's going to pay attention, and I'm going to see where the tools can fit. Or you can be the person who says, we've been doing it this way for 10, 15, 20 years, and it seems to be working fine, and then you won't be here anymore.
Yeah. I mean, even if you look at, television, and talk about Netflix, I always find it fascinating because you look at Netflix, Amazon, and Disney, and from the outside, people think, well, they're the same, they're streamers. I think, well, Disney, people go watch a Disney film. They don't go and watch a 20th Century Fox film. It's a brand. It's also got the parks. It's a whole history.
It's a relationship.
Exactly. Then you look at Amazon, and we know the guys there very well. We've done numerous projects with them, and one of my films is on Prime. Prime is the TV commercial section, in effect. The ecosystem of an Amazon Prime customer is probably more like $1,700-$1,800 a year on amortized out, of which $76 or so, it may have changed since the last time I looked at it, is the cost of Prime. So that makes sense under the guise of a streaming platform. And then Netflix is really now a financial instrument, because when they create a product and they put it to market, I mean, they don't even tend to do that much now. They'll pay for things and pay for it 10% over production cost. So there's not really a tail of revenue coming in as such. And they're a financial instrument on the stock market. They had a major technical problem, which is when they'd launched, people were sharing username and passwords, and at one point the average Netflix account was used in 4 additional other households, and one username, one account was typically used by 8 different people. And the problem that they had was, in order to get growth, they had to get them into paying customers. The only way to do that is to get the core customer that they're all around, upset them and cut them off in part. So effectively, partially commit suicide in order to get growth. So they just hit market saturation in every territory.
Yeah.
So what's the incentive to actually spend any more money on the promotion of any product? Therefore, from a producer perspective, there's hardly any chance of ever making any money by having anything on there, or for it to have a good life to be out there creatively, because there's no incentive to promote it, because their function is to reduce churn. That is it. How things happen in the future, I think there will be more change, but again, just looking at things of how they actually work and what the motivating factors are from a business perspective, and this huge disruption to be had across almost every single sector, but to look at what is rather than the preconceived idea of what was, on the basis of, well, this is what we did last year, so we'll do, the private equity model. We'll look at what we're going to do this year, and it's 20% more optimistic than last year. Well, how are we going to achieve that? Well, let's reduce staff a bit, and it's unoriginal thinking. That's not innovation.
No. I like you brought the example of video streamers up, because there was a moment in time when, speaking of patterns that are repeating themselves over time, this is one. There's a moment in time where Amazon had to make a decision whether to get into original content production or not. Netflix had made that decision already. People like Google and, YouTube and Apple had flirted with it only a little bit at the time, and all of a sudden Amazon was committing to it. And I remember when in the industry, I remember talking to the CEO of Discovery Networks at the time, who was saying, like, they're never going to want my margins. He said, why would any of them get into my business? I said, they're not getting into your business. Your business is a feature of their product. And their product in this case is a retail relationship with customers that yields millions of dollars. And as a result, they don't care about your margins. They don't have to deal with your margin pressure. You are a marketing cost for Amazon. And it has proven to be true. But that pattern of someone's business becoming someone else's feature in a product, that pattern is going to repeat over and over again. And it makes me wonder where AI will influence that. Which AI tools, which are products today, will simply become features in other products? Which new products that don't exist right now, where people talk about social media, where the user is the product? Okay, that's a product that exists right now. How will that change in a world where AI can change the user's experience of that product? So these are things that keep your antennae up. To speak about being attentive to where the opportunities are, this is one of those opportunities, to be the company that realizes that you can transform an industry that everyone else thought was low margin, uninteresting, never going to change. And you come along and suddenly you're changing the shape of parking garages across the United States.
A thing which I've explored for a while, and again, it's the zooming out and looking at how people have a relationship, for example, with music, with entertainment, but the psychological differences of work ethic, the introduction of the common application of the Dunning-Kruger effect by removing that element in the middle. So question, answer. Usually it would be to reach a conclusion and an answer. You have a question and you undertake the research. You seek experiences, you validate, you question, you learn. But to just be from question to answer, collapse that down over a period of time, if generations of people have just had the false impression that they've learned the answers, but there's no validation of, well, how could you critically understand whether that answer is in any way correct, seems to be a very, very dangerous position, which has been facilitated from 10 years of social media adoption to kind of collapse down the attention span, the narrow the mind, and the adoption of algorithms. We've discussed it on the podcast before, where the linear view that an individual has, given we're of a generation, we weren't born with phones in our hands. We were there when it became a thing. So we know the before and after. But if all you've ever had is that experience, we see it with music, that people think this is what everyone listens to because they've only got a single picture in, and it tends to feed you the same thing plus or minus a couple of degrees. And the moment people realize that's not how it is, that everyone is, oh, their experience is unique to them, another one's sort of unique, but it's the propagation of everyone thinks like this. Therefore, those who visibly don't, there must be a problem with. I mean, it creates a social divide, but put that into the workplace. And you've got all these people who say, oh, no, this is how it works. This is how it works. That equally kind of puts the opportunity where those who can critically think, suddenly to become extremely successful is far easier because you've actually flattened the capabilities of the majority of people because they've lost the ability to think.
If people in the audience really get what you just said, you've described it 100% correctly, in my opinion, this idea that on average, people will revert to some sort of easy mean of, I ask a question, I get an answer, and the answer is true, and so I act on it. And you describe that time between asking and getting an answer as a crucial time. I even would move it one step this way. Before you even figure out what question is worth asking, you have to ask a lot of dumb questions and get incorrect answers or answers that don't make sense, so that you finally get to the point where the question worth asking is in your mind because you understand the question you're asking in a different way than you could have before. So that then the answer, the journey to get that answer that you just described, if suddenly AI just popped in and gave you the answer, there's no way the answer can be correct. There's no way, because it can't understand everything that went into you formulating that question. It simply cannot. So if the audience understands that what you're describing is a world in which other people have collapsed, whatever question I have must be the right question, and whatever answer I get must be the right answer. And if you just bypass all of that by being the person who still seeks the question that matters and then goes through the process of getting the answer, you will be leagues ahead of everyone else.
Yeah. And I think that information of going straight to the answer, the bigger risk is, I think I've said it before on the podcast, if you ask a question to 1,000 people and they all tell you the same answer, does that mean it's correct? Or does that mean 1,000 people believe that same answer? Where is the relationship with reality, evidence, or anything else? So actually is the propagation of a populistic approach to information, but who put the information there? What's the authenticity? What's the validation of it? And all of a sudden, you can look and feel very isolated. And this is where it comes to speaking up in organizations, becoming a leader, to look at something, to do research and say, well, that empirically is just not true. Why am I the only person when everyone else has reached another conclusion? And then you begin to realize why. And people are hiding in numbers, or I mean, it's a whole minefield of what it means from a personal perspective, from a life, a culture perspective, and an enterprise perspective. And those who can rationalize and see and think in the right way and ask the right questions. And I think that's what it comes down to. And this is why I believe what Forrester are doing, what you're doing, and the entire team is critically important and of incredible value to companies across the world to really position how to think, because that's the first step in unlocking the innovation, the potential, the growth, the possibilities for individuals, departments, organizations, and industries.
Possibilities become probabilities with this approach. And instead of, remote chances that maybe we can have that future, we can influence, we can make that future more likely by following this kind of path. I'm a sincere believer in that. I wouldn't have spent nearly 30 years on this path if I didn't believe that. But it will come down to individual decisions. Individuals situated in teams, within organizations, within industries, and all of that entails. But those individuals are going to have to choose to see these things that we're describing. And I think, I'm betting on people. I think they're going to do it.
Excellent. Well, James, it's been a pleasure having you here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.